In many ways, Sonic Forces Overclocked is like a dream come true. It feels like all the potential that was missing from Sonic Forces has finally been fully realized in a fully polished experience that delivers on the aspects that Forces couldn't. Every aspect of the game has been tuned up, or overclocked, so to speak, to the point where I'm fully confident in saying that this is one of the better Sonic Boost games. Personally, I'd even give it the edge over Sonic Frontiers. Even barring a few slight flaws that we'll get into later, Sonic Forces Overclocked is still an amazing experience that I wholeheartedly recommend checking out. I'll have all the socials and stuff linked in the description for you to download yourself, so please give it a try. With that being said, let's double boost into it. What? Oh please, don't act like you're the pinnacle of comedy. Straight away, the first most noticeable improvement are the graphics, and I think the graphics here were really well handled. They've sort of reimagined all the stages to be more interesting. Luminous Forest definitely got the best aspect because it was reimagined twice. First as a nuclear winter type of stage, and then it was set on fire. The nuclear winter portion though felt a little bit underwhelming because it clearly felt like a first half to the main stage, which was the second portion, so it's pretty short and doesn't have too much interesting going on, making it my least favorite stage in the game. However, these visual transitions persist throughout the entire game because you can see in the first stage, Green Hill Zone, that Sonic actually starts off in Labyrinth Zone in the first cutscene, so we see him go through Labyrinth Zone and then transition into Green Hill. These background details and visuals were in the base game of Sonic Forces as well, but I think here they get a chance to shine. The cinematography in general has seen a huge step up from the base game because here we can see a bunch of cool events, camera changes, and a bunch of stuff that really makes you feel like you're actually playing a video game and it's in an active world. And this all culminates really nicely in the final level, which is a reimagining of Null Space and a boss fight for Metal Sonic and Infinite. One weird thing is though, this Null Space level actually has Capital City in it, but that wasn't even a level we experienced in Sonic Forces Overclocked. Probably just teasing for the future, but we'll see. Alright, now we can talk about the actual gameplay. Let's start with the controls and physics because I think these are some of the most improved aspects from the base of Sonic Forces. When boosting, Sonic is now much easier to turn, and you can actually feel like you're controlling him instead of him being forced in a straight line, as well as that the quickstep has now been improved, and so has the acceleration. The avatar benefits greatly from these changes as it's now much easier to position yourself for the platforming. The stages also make more frequent use of the drift that the avatar has, and it's now less automated as you get more control over it, to access higher areas and new shortcuts. Unfortunately, the game is still pretty stiff while jumping, and this is also an issue that carried over into Sonic Frontiers cyberspace, so I don't know if it's even possible to get rid of it, but as it stands, it still feels really awkward to maneuver yourself around while in a jump. It's not the biggest issue as I only really noticed it in platform-heavy sections where I messed up a QTE or something and had to reposition myself, or when I was going back to find a different shortcut. Speaking of the shortcuts, let's talk level design. Now, when talking to some friends about Sonic Forces Overclocked before it released, some people are saying that, oh yeah, this just looks like base Forces level design. It's still linear, and it still doesn't look that enjoyable. And I can kinda see where they're coming from, because the footage we had seen at that point wasn't really the best representation of what this game's level design is actually like. The game is way more fast-paced than the original Forces and almost matches Sonic Unleashed in its speed. There's barely ever a moment where you slow down and stop, because most of the obstacles are all reaction-based. Even in the 2D sections, they basically remove the platforming that the original Forces had. There's a lot of sections in Sonic Forces Overclocked where it can feel really satisfying to pull a string of actions together that get you on a higher path, and that make the level go by faster, or lead to a red ring, which are now thankfully not placed on the lower paths anymore. Now, the main reason I think people felt that way towards the initial reveal was that Sonic Forces Overclocked actually has a lot of stretches where you're just either quick-stepping or going forward, and this is clearly an attempt to stretch out the stages, which I don't hate. I think it's perfectly fine for these to be there, and they are more engaging than the ones in Sonic Forces. Each boost game has this, it's just necessary to keep the stages longer. Where the problem is that since this is a mod, it's not as easy to integrate this into the level, especially when there's so much visual overhaul done, that they sometimes look kind of jarring and out of place. That being said, I still think the Overclock team did an amazing job of making this work, and I think the level design here is genuinely good. I genuinely have to rack my brain and think about how I'm going to reach the higher areas sometimes. There's a lot of reaction involved, and I think it genuinely asks more of the player, which I really like. It takes a design principle of Sonic Forces having smaller, shorter alternative paths that launch you back to the main path after a while, and it expands upon it. These alternate paths are now much longer and sometimes can even take like half the whole stage. Another thing I really like is the increased use of the air boost. There's a lot of sections where you can just jump off of a ledge, which grants you extra height that you can then use to air boost through the whole level. But don't worry, unlike Sonic Forces, there's an actual balance of the air boost here. It's not too powerful to the point where you can skip over the entire level design, but it's just used for shorter skips. There is one other small issue, and that's combining the visual effects and level design, where it can sometimes be kind of hard to see where you're supposed to go next, and in a game that's as fast-paced and as reaction-heavy as this one, it can be a little bit jarring to have a death that's caused by you just not seeing what to do next. Small gripes aside though, I think this is a very good fan recreation of Unleashed-style level design. It's not as polished as the boost stages from Unleashed, but I still think it does a pretty good job of emulating that style. Another interesting tidbit about the Avatar level specifically is that they gave the Wispons some new abilities. Now I haven't had the chance to test all of these out, but some of them have been granted new abilities to interact with different level elements to take different shortcuts, and I think that's pretty neat. The Wisps and Wispons were always pretty cool additions that allowed you to interact with level in different ways without having you take on a different form like the Werehog, so I think they were probably one of the best ways of padding time. Specifically in Sonic Colors, not in Lost World and Forces though. But I think here they're taken up to that notch, and given some more interactivity. Now to end it off, I'm just going to talk about quality of life and general features. It seems that no matter if it's fan-made or official, that Sonic projects are just going to have really good music, and Sonic Forces Overclocked is absolutely no exception. You've been listening to it all video, and I think this is one of the better Sonic OSTs in general. It remixes and reimagines Sonic Forces tracks in different ways. As well as that, it adds its original spin on it with the cutscene music and a new vocal theme for the final boss, which is really, really good, and I recommend you go listen to it, or just play it yourself. And speaking of the cutscenes all have full voice acting and are hand-drawn. The art is fantastic, and the voice acting for a fan project is honestly not too bad. The Chaotix voice actors all sound in character, Sonic's is pretty good as well. I also really like Infinite's voice and the effect they gave to Neo Metal Sonic. However, I don't know if it's just me, but I noticed a few issues with the audio quality in the cutscenes sometimes. It wasn't really that common, and it was never really jarring enough to make a difference, but I did notice it. But it's still pretty excusable because it is a fan project. To talk more about the story and writing of the game, I do think the character interactions were handled pretty well. Sonic feels like himself, and the rookie, while he doesn't talk, still feels like a heroic avatar for the player. The game does seem to take a lot of cues from the IDW comics of the whole Resistance arc and Sonic going away instead of being part of the cleanup crew, and Amy and Knuckles taking over that process. There's still that occasional hint of comedy like the more modern Sonic stories, but this time they actually all hit. The whole story takes us back to the Death Egg where Neo Metal Sonic and Infinite are overclocking the Phantom Ruby, and they put the power source in the exact same place as last time, in a fit of brilliance. That was actually another great character interaction I found. Neo Metal Sonic and Infinite were constantly arguing even during the final boss, with Sonic even pointing it out. The story in itself feels like an epilogue to Sonic Forces, giving us closure on the characters and their arcs, while also having an interesting new antagonist to fight. It's nothing too deep, but it really doesn't need to be. Sonic's cliche apology to the rookie though was pretty funny, like what is this, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse? Whoops, wrong image.